Hi and welcome to the Journalism Salute. I'm Mark Simon. In each episode, we'll talk to or about an interesting person or organization related to journalism. The intent is to show that journalists are not the enemy of the people. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we're joined by Don Colacino. Don is a filmmaker who has just started production on a documentary, Trusted Sources, that is about the decline of trust in news and those working to restore it. Don, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I've been wanting to talk to someone who works in documentaries, so we're going to connect a couple of dots by talking to someone who's making a journalism documentary. He's made one short one about the campaign for a national popular vote for president, which I watched and you can find on Amazon and in a few other places. Typically here, I would ask you to tell the story of your career path that led you to this point, but I'm going to take a little shortcut on that. You've got 30 years of career to tell us about. Your degrees are in electrical technology and electrical engineering. You worked at Intel for 16 years and at LSI in marketing for another 9. And then in your 50s, you went to film school. In 2015, you formed Colacino Productions. You make commercial, independent, and documentary films, short features as well, promos for organizations like Autism Speaks. Also, I noticed for local bands. With all that, how do we get your journalism interest and your interest in journalism work?
Boy, it really goes back a long ways. I grew up in a small town, and when I was in high school, I was able to get a job at a local radio station. So that's where I kind of got my feet wet with, editing and even a little bit of journalism. In one summer, I basically was tasked with going in the morning, starting the coffee, calling the hospitals and police stations, and writing up some local news stories to merge in with the Associated Press news off the teletype machine, which kind of tells you how far back that goes. But so that was my first experience, my first foray into journalism. But I'm not a journalist. But I had a great interest in editing. I did a couple of radio plays while I was there, and that was a lot of fun. Editing then was splicing tape, literally. Then that kind of went by the wayside as I went to engineering school, and when I got out, of course, I got jobs in the high tech industry. When I went to work for Intel, I was trained at one point to be a media spokesperson along with others in my group. So we went through media training and learning how people answer tough questions when you're under the gun. And then that took its own course. But then much later on, journalism, was nothing I was really thinking of, or even filmmaking at that point. But then the 2016 election happened, and I started seeing, the media was being referred to as the enemy of the people, that not the media, but specifically news media. And that just really bothered me, especially when you would see people say things that were absolutely not true that you could absolutely verify just by looking at the pictures. Anyway, that was what kind of got me interested in poking around at journalism a little more and figuring out how things were done and why people were buying into that false narrative.
So why filmmaking?
Well, filmmaking goes back to the editing stuff, and I've done some video editing just as a hobby for decades. But then I sort of aged out of the high tech industry, you might say, and I thought, okay, well, what do I really want to do? And I thought about the editing stuff and my home videos, and I thought, hey, maybe I should go to film school and learn how to do this professionally. So that's what I did. I took a couple of years, went to Colorado Film School, got a degree in writing and producing, and while I was there, documentary film came up, and that was one of the subjects I took. And so I thought, this is a way I can really make a difference and kind of give back.
So who were the journalists that you admired growing up and over time?
Oh, gosh. Really, the first journalist I think I was ever aware of was Walter Cronkite. I used to have to sit through Walter Cronkite before I could watch the Flintstones in the evening. But really, as time went on, there were other journalists I paid attention to. Judy Woodruff on PBS is one that I really admire, and Jen White on the NPR program The 1A. She just has a really great way of talking with people from all different parts of the political and ideological spectrum.
Give us a sense of history, because you mentioned Walter Cronkite, and people had a different level of trust for news. The most trusted man in America, Walter Cronkite.
That's right.
Comparing as you were growing up to what you're seeing now with what you experienced with the 2016 election, and then like literally right now?
Mhm. Yeah, as I was growing up, of course, people trusted news because everything that you saw or read pretty much agreed, right? There were three major news networks, and they controlled, at least the national news that we all saw on television. Newspapers, of course, gave a little more of a variety, but I think, then as today, people probably get more of their news fed to them through the media, through the broadcast or now internet media. But things have changed because as new technology came in, the cable channels came in, and that brought some very specialized or focused toward a particular audience type of newscast. And then, of course, when the internet came about, it started with chat rooms that it was really only a small percentage of people, I think, really got involved in. But then as social media came in, that sort of enabled that conversation to the masses.
So what led you to do a movie, or to want to do a movie about trust in media? Why do you think that this would make an interesting movie?
Well, in 2019, I read a report by the United Commission on Trust in Media. I forgot exactly what it was called, but the title of the report was Crisis in Democracy. And it was all about the decline of trust in institutions across America. And trust has been declining since the 1970s, really after Watergate. Watergate, and all of the revelations that came out about that, I think really gave people a lot of trust that the media was serving its purpose as a watchdog, holding our leaders to account. But since then, and the technology that's brought in all of these different disparate I hesitate to say journalistic voices because they're not all journalists. But as all of these new voices came into the realm of communications, people didn't know what to believe. And today we get so much information so fast from such a variety of sources that really people have trouble deciding or determining what's worthy of their trust.
Outline the movie for us in terms of what you hope it to be.
Well, the film will start out with an examination of trust. What is trust? Why do we trust? Why do we mistrust? And what are the ramifications of mistrust of news? We see, for example, people who can't agree on basic facts, and that pulls our society apart, even pulls our families apart. We've seen public unrest based on misinformation. That means people are acting on information that actually isn't true. And that's a real danger for our democracy. So pretty high stakes. Then in Act 2, I'll go through a history of journalism in the U.S. and the many reasons for mistrust that have come up throughout that history. For example, in the late 1800s, we had a period of yellow journalism. There's been plenty of examples of racial bias in news reporting and media ownership and a lack of diversity in the newsroom. We've seen a spate of local news outlets closing down because advertising dollars are shifting to the internet, and people are not subscribing anymore because they think they're getting free news on the internet. In Act 3, though, I'll follow the people who are working on solutions to each of these problems. We'll sit in on editorial meetings where editors and journalists are discussing ethical issues and which stories to report or how to cover them. We will follow journalists training other journalists to be more transparent about their reporting and why they've chose certain sources to increase the trust of their audiences. And we'll see people working to keep local news outlets open. And most importantly, we'll give people tools and techniques to identify news sources that are worthy of their trust. The whole idea is to, create a sense of value of quality journalism. As a result, people should be subscribing to trustworthy news sources, hopefully donating to their public media outlets, maybe becoming a little more active in the community and in society, helping to save their own local news outlets and working with legislators to drive public policy that prevents commercial companies from amplifying misinformation. If people focus their attention on quality journalism, maybe we can keep our democracy together for another couple hundred years.
History, psychology, and solutions, it sounds like the themes of this. One of those people I know is Joy Mayer, who we had on as a guest in the early days of this podcast. Who are some of the other people that you're talking to?
So Joe Torres, it was a co-author of a book along with Juan Gonzalez, who you may have seen on Democracy Now. They authored a book called News for All the People, the epic story of race in and the American media. Joe Torres will be consulting with me on it. Larry Rickman is the editor of the Colorado Sun, which is a public benefit corporation. It's an all digital news outlet that it was started by people who left the Denver Post in 2018 when it was bought out by a hedge fund. Lynn Schofield Clark is a professor of journalism at University of Denver. Rod Hicks from the Society of Professional Journalists has a really interesting story to tell of something that he did a couple of years ago called the Casper Project, where he went out with some other journalists and held sort of an open forum over several weeks in Casper, Wyoming. Casper was chosen because it was probably one of the least trusting places of news, the news media in the country. So they specifically chose that and learned some very interesting things. If you had a chance to ever watch the broadcast of it, the local PBS station broadcast it, it's really disheartening to see how much bias people perceive in news, mainly because it doesn't agree with their own personal viewpoints.
Viewpoints that are in some cases etched hundreds of years old.
Right. That's right.
Yep.
And you know, and the thing is with social media, and we've seen with Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower who testified before Congress, that now there's proof that social media does amplify things that are more sensational, and it tends to feed us information that we already believe. And so they keep giving us more to keep us engaged, and you become surrounded by this echo chamber. So that's all you hear. And then when you hear something that doesn't agree with your opinion, you tend to question it more and believe, oh, it's just not true.
With the solutions that people are talking about, what is the level of, I guess, realistic with them? Because I kind of feel like we're in this multi-generational problem. It's not like the other side is just going to pack up and go home, right? Like you're not going to snap your finger and this be fixed. Can you give us some sort of balance of maybe optimism and realism here as to how some of these things get solved?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, it's on the realistic side, we're always going to have misinformation, and we're always going to have people pushing agendas. Okay. And you know, even true journalists may do this, but they will, if they're doing it professionally, if they're really doing the job well, they identify and label what is opinion, what is advocacy versus what is supposed to be straight news. But that's the realistic side. Optimistically, and I believe there's a lot of room for improvement, and we will get there. But we'll always go through cycles. We're starting to recognize how, I'll call it junk news, is amplified, all right, as I mentioned with the Facebook whistleblower. And lots of people are working on different aspects of rebuilding trust. Joy Mayer, for example, goes out and trains journalists on how to earn back trust, mainly through transparency, through doing things like labeling information versus news. There is an organization called the National Trust for Local Media, or for Local News, the National Trust for Local News. They have actually teamed up with the Colorado Sun to buy 24 Colorado newspapers that were in danger of either folding or perhaps being acquired by an outside organization like a hedge fund. So the idea was to keep those local news outlets, first of all, publishing news, and second of all, keeping them in local hands. So they really reflect the views of the community that they're reporting in. There's another organization called Ad Fontes Media, based in Denver, Colorado, and they publish the media bias chart. Many people may be familiar with this from the internet, but they also work with corporations, companies that want to advertise on the internet, but perhaps not put their news on a particularly biased news site. So they want to make sure that their advertising only appears on responsible journalism sites. So they consult that way. And they also do consulting with schools and consumer media literacy training. So those are just a few of the examples of the kinds of solutions I'll show in the film.
The micro-targeting thing is fascinating, because you hear about micro-targeting in advertising and how I'm watching a show like Jeopardy, and suddenly there are things that come on products that I've got in my house. It's like, whoa, it's interesting that that can be applied in the news world as well, with places that want to advertise in the best possible place. Talking about your film background a little bit, what characterizes your filmmaking style, and what are we going to see when this movie is complete?
Well, I think, the first thing that I want to do is make sure that the audience can see themselves in the characters in my film, because that's really the way to draw an audience in. And with this type of film, particularly any documentary, really, you don't want to try to preach to the converted. You want to get a broader audience. So I do a lot of on the street interviews, just getting the opinions of regular people like all of us, right? And I think that's what people will tend to see, where they'll tend to see themselves reflected. I also like to let my interview subjects speak for themselves. I don't want to use voiceover to say what they meant, or to take us necessarily in a different direction. The voiceover might be used to connect parts of the film. And then I guess thirdly, just being creative to make do with the budget that I have. Thinking back to one time working for a corporation, when I was doing a training video, we wanted to have a teleprompter, but couldn't afford to rent one, so I built one. And anyway, so you'll see a lot. That's the
advantage of a tech background.
That's right. Now, this is more mechanical than tech, but
yep. That's awesome. Okay, so with Winner Take All, that's your other documentary. It's about a 30-minute film about the idea of a national popular vote and the national popular vote movement. You focus largely on the state in which you're in, Colorado. Can you just educate people about what that film was and what you learned from doing it?
Yeah, well, that also was kind of spurred by the 2016 election. The national popular vote issue, there was actually a bill in the Colorado state legislature that was in the news at the time. And I saw a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding, really, of what the Electoral College was all about. So I, did a little of my own research and thought, well, it really isn't that complicated if you take the time to go research this, but not everybody does that. And so the one thing I wanted to, well, first of all, I also needed a film for my documentary filmmaking class. And I thought that was the perfect subject. So I started out, just made a 10-minute version of it for school. But then because it was something that really was in the news, I thought, let's make a good half-hour program out of this. And so what I did was got, the legislator who was sponsoring the bill. I talked to political consultants. I talked to former electors. I talked to the opponents of the bill, and just went through a little history to show how the Electoral College worked, and even created a little graphics to show how gerrymandering plays in with that. Absolutely.
And what did you learn about filmmaking from it?
Oh, well, I learned, for one thing, that legal costs are tremendous.
Okay.
Anytime you want to use particularly third-party footage, even if it's old historical footage, someone probably has the rights to that. And you have to have a lawyer, an entertainment lawyer, go through every minute of your film and ask you for proof that you have rights to use each frame of the film. And of course, that takes time. Time is money. I also learned to leave a little more breathing room in the time frame of the film. If you watch Winner Take All, there's a lot of information coming at you. I mean, it's kind of maybe it's a rehash of civics class, but a lot of us think we understand the Electoral College, and really we don't. There might be subtle details that we forgot. So I put so much into this. Universally, people told me, boy, I had to watch it, 2 or 3 times to really get everything. And that's not what I want to hear as a filmmaker. So now it's like, show some information, and then maybe have a little music, show people doing their jobs, doing whatever it is they do, and let that information sink in so people can relax and enjoy it. And then finally, to just plan for distribution from the outset, because that takes a long time to, for example, get a broadcast lined up.
How long did it take to go from kernel of an idea to finished product?
On Winner Take All, probably about a year. On my current film, I'm planning for 2 years. And I find, and on Winner Take All, that was funded all out of pocket and with a lot of free labor from my fellow students. I don't have that luxury this time, so people need to get paid, and I found I need to raise funds. So that's what's going to take this thing a lot longer.
We hope it certainly gets to the next level. Do you have other filmmaking projects kind of in mind of a similar ilk once this one is complete?
Well, I hope to do more documentaries. That really, I mean, I feel that's the best way to kind of give back to society a little bit. I'm not doing these films to make money. I hope to get my time paid for, but it's not like I'm a Hollywood producer and I'm going to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. But no, right now I'm just focused on getting this film to the finish line.
If you were talking to a student journalist who had an interest in documentary filmmaking, what's the thing that you would tell them to be focused on, like right now?
Make sure you have a good producer, because there are so many pieces of a film, so many moving parts. You really need someone to focus on it. Yeah, that's probably and that's true for any type of film, not just documentary.
Certainly. If we're going to be here and recommend your journalism movie to others, how about you recommend a journalism movie to us?
Oh, absolutely. There's tons of them out there. One of the most recent ones, it just came out earlier this year, and I think it's going to be running on national PBS again, is a movie called Storm Lake. And it's about a newspaper in the town of Storm Lake, Iowa, that is struggling for survival. And we go through this, the film goes through the story of that newspaper. It's a family-run newspaper, and the different, what do you want to say? People in the town of different ends of the political spectrum and how they communicate with each other. So you see a little of all of that. It's a really interesting film, and it kind of shows the importance of the local newspaper. Another one was one called Page One Inside the New York Times. That was a film from 2011 that a lot of people may have seen already. Yep. I think it was on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah, and then of course The Social Dilemma. That was from just last year, and that film goes through all of the reasons that we might mistrust because of social media and what we're pushed there. But again, unlike those films, I'm not just covering the problems. I'm trying to move to the solutions for those problems.
And that would certainly be very promising if you were able to do that. One other that I thought, when you said Page One, I thought you might also say Obit, which I loved, which was the profile of the obituary writers at the New York Times as well. That was excellent. That came out, boy, that's probably 6-7 years old, but that's an excellent documentary. All right, last question. You've already saluted a whole bunch of people as we've talked here, but I'll ask you for one more. Is there a journalist or journalism organization that you aren't spotlighting in your documentary that you would like to salute for their good work?
Yeah, definitely. And I've already mentioned the program. It's the 1A on WAMU. It's an NPR station in Washington, D.C. I just love the way, first of all, the variety of topics that they cover and the in-depth discussions that they have with people from all parts of the political spectrum.
It's funny that my interests in this podcast and my interest in NPR both kind of moved up the ladder at right around the same time. There are a lot of great things certainly to pick off of NPR. Don Colacino, filmmaker, thank you for joining us. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about your film?
Yes, the two ways. One, go to my website, the website for the film, and it's trustdocfilm.com, trust.film.com, and there's a contact form on there, or you can send an email to info@trustdocfilm.com. And yeah, there's a trailer up on the website. People can donate to the film if they really believe this is something that needs to get out there, and look forward to hearing from people.
Great. Don Colacino, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to tell you about another podcast that goes well with this one. Join Will Hitchcock and Siva Vidyanathan on Democracy in Danger. Each week they interview brilliant guests who are helping them save government by the people, one episode at a time. Find Democracy in Danger wherever you get your podcasts or visit dindanger.org. Their most recent episode is the first in a series on democracy hotspots, starting with Charlottesville. Check it out. Thank you for listening to the Journalism Salute. Please let us know what you think of the show. You can find us on Twitter at JournalismPod, and you can email us at journalismsalute@gmail.com.